Hey, folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. If you are a new listener to the podcast, welcome, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. In this episode, I'm very excited to welcome my guest today. I got my words around the wrong way there, Dan Furt. So, a bit about Dan. He provides mixing, mastering, and mentorship to hundreds of producers, to have running ADR sessions as well for such shows as Stranger Things and Ms. Marvel, which we'll dive into in a bit later. Dan works at a local post-production studio called Precursor Productions and runs his own studio called Dan Fur Productions, which focuses on helping electronic musicians develop a process that allows them to make more of the music they want. And today, or rather in this episode, Dan is going to share with us his thoughts on the role of mentoring and also a recent change in his production and songwriting process, which we were discussing off air, and maybe, if we have time, some mixing and mastering tips. So Dan, thanks for joining me today, and how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Mark. This has been a delight. I know it's been a long time coming, and I've been looking forward to the date in my calendar for a while now. Yeah, so thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, my pleasure. It has been a long time coming, and I'm looking forward to this because I know you're an advocate of sound synthesis and sampling, so it's going to be cool to get some info on that. But what I thought would be quite cool to start off with is Dan Fur Productions. So I mentioned that you run your own studio where you focus on helping other electronic musicians. Can you tell our audience, because it's not something we've really discussed a great deal about on the podcast, and the role of a mentor and what it is that you actually do for up-and-coming or established even producers?
Yeah, so in order to sort of explain that, I want to sort of explain a story about how I got started. And really, I was like everybody else at the beginning, an avid self-learner, went on YouTube, went on every sort of course I could find that was within a reasonable price range, and just learned and learned and learned. And I thought I was doing pretty great. I thought I was doing wonderful, and by all means I was. But then, I sort of went to this workshop and was introduced to, who I view as my current mentor, who is sort of the owner of Precursor Productions, the post studio that you mentioned a little bit before. And his backstory is, and his roots are actually, he used to play, underground shows, and it was like, early 90s techno was his jam kind of thing. So he comes from an early era of the electronic music scene, and that's sort of how we bridged our gap and connected. And at the very beginning, I was like, I will be a broom boy in exchange to be able to watch you work kind of thing. And like anybody at first, having never met me, he's like, all right, well, let's have a chat. And so that chat led into more chats and hovering and hanging and, essentially paying for mentorship is really what it all led down to. And that was really the liminal and the transitional moment in my skills and my abilities, really. And it was, entirely due to the reality that you don't know what you don't know. And that's something that's so hard to understand and to process at the beginning, because everything is available online and the resources are out there, but the difficulty becomes navigating it and sorting through the weeds and understanding, well, what is relevant, what is, not only good information, but good information that is pertinent to you. Not every bit of insight and information is going to be the best case scenario for your system and your process. And that's sort of where, mentorship grabbed me and was like, hey, you're doing this right, and you think you're doing this right, but here is, someone with 20 years post-experience being like, hey, this is how I've seen it done in numerous times in the past. And again, it comes down to you just don't know what you don't know. And that was really the concept that sort of brought it all forward, because that changed my life. And before that, I never really viewed this as more than a hobby. And as soon as I got that mentorship, not only did my skills develop, but how I viewed what those skills were and my relationship with those skills completely redeveloped as well. And so that's sort of what I try and instill in my mentorship a lot more is, sure, the technical stuff, we can go into details about that all night and day, but the resources are out there. I oftentimes like to sort of spend the time a little bit more focused on your relationship and overcoming really imposter syndrome, which is kind of the biggest issue that we all face. And it's a very challenging one. And so that's kind of where I view the most important role of mentorship is not necessarily in the technical abilities, because that there's a lot of those resources out there, and they're not hard to find these days, but understanding how to sort through those resources and pick you back up when you kind of went down the wrong rabbit hole, because we're all going to do that. We're all going to think that this is a valuable skill that we want to sort of develop and grow for a while. And then maybe we'll spend way too much time on that and realize, wow, that was just a wasted effort. Why did I, and then you sink down and you sink down. And being able to pick yourself back up and move from that is essential. Otherwise it's going to be over.
Yeah. Mentorship is massively important, I think. And I think it's great what you said there about how you started essentially like the runner, the T-boy, just to get your foot in the door, get yourself a mentor. And then, and I totally echo what you said there about the wealth of information that is available online. And I've said it on a few episodes of the podcast. And being able to navigate through all that information to the right and pertinent information to you, and having somebody there to help you navigate that can save you so much time and can accelerate you on. It kind of reminds me of the time when I'm a guitarist and I was playing guitar and I was self-taught for ages. And then I went to a studio to record an album, realised that my technique was terrible, and then when I got a lesson, and then through that coaching, I guess you call it, from tutoring, I just saw my growth. And mentoring is huge. And like I said off air, it's not something we discussed massively on this show. With regards to mentoring, because it is incredibly important, you offer mentoring yourself. If you're an individual looking for mentoring, what qualities would you look for in a mentor?
I would say the biggest one is, or in a mentor or a mentee, essentially. So, like, as someone looking to find a mentor.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I would definitely say your relationship with them, right? Because I myself have, like I say, that one mentor. He has been essentially my audio rock since day one. But of course, like any other. I've definitely tried to branch out and tried to find other mentors and other people that can, fill gaps and fill in other knowledge, because I'm a firm believer that you can learn a lot from everybody at any skill level. So mentors can come in all shapes and sizes and whatever else. So I've definitely gone out, experimenting with a couple of others, and I feel like what it comes down to is how you have a personal connection with them is really the biggest thing, and truly having the confidence that they want what's best for you, which is kind of a hard thing to say, right? Like, how do you look for that in a mentor without actually having some sessions and some conversations with them? And that definitely becomes a little bit of a challenge. But, there definitely are some yellow flags that we can all pick on very quickly when it seems like, okay, this guy is asking questions that seem to just be revolved around money and what, and them and their system and their structure. And I would say the biggest quality is try to find someone that actually values you and sees potential in you and actually wants what's best for you and is going to try and follow along with that. And like I say, that is a very challenging reality to look for and actually find, because everybody's who's honest is going to front that, and everybody who's not is going to try and fake that.
Yeah. You want to find someone who's got like a vested interest in you and your progression. Rather than, like you say, rather than the dollar signs or the pound signs, as we say over here.
It also comes down to what do you want to necessarily do, and so, having a mentor that obviously has the skills that you want to learn is everything, right? So not one mentor is going to fill every single role, right? You're gonna. If you wanted to, say, start a mixing business, you should realistically have a business mentor and maybe an audio mentor or like a mastermind group or something to be able to get resources from there, right? But I think the idea that one mentor is going to fit all your shoes is probably going to leave you lacking in some areas.
It's a good thought, actually. I never considered it that way. Having multiple mentors, because as you say there, you want somebody to fill that particular gap in whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah, very interesting. I never thought of having multiple mentors.
And like I say, mentors can come in all shapes and sizes, right? There can be mentors that you pay for, but there can also just be people that you view, that you have strong relationships for, that you actually go for guidance. And right, and, not every moment with them may be a mentorship moment, but being able to differentiate, when you're kind of having those mentorship moments versus just a standard relationship is there's so much to learn in every conversation, in in every instance, and being able to grasp as much of that as possible is really the best way to go. And understanding that mentors can come in all sizes. Obviously, not everybody is going to be a mentor, and not every relationship is going to have mentorship moments. There definitely are, characteristics and qualities that you need to be there to be able to, maintain that mentorship experience. But there definitely are a lot of people in your life that, I find when people tell me about them, I'm like, well, that right there is a mentor. You're telling me you do have a couple more, but they're not really perceiving them as mentors, and therefore they're not really able to fully grasp the experience in those mentorship moments when people are, throwing information at them, kind of thing. And we've all been guilty about that before, but being able to pick up on that more and more is going to really enhance your skills and your abilities just to grow as an individual and as your skills.
Yeah, sort of identifying when it is you're actually being mentored in a way, or when that coaching's happened. That's fantastic advice. Yeah, it's great.
As for when it comes to looking for paid mentorship, that's definitely a little bit more tricky, because there is a lot of dedicated, coaching businesses that, I personally have no idea how they function or how they run. So I really cannot speak on any of their behalf, but they do seem very heavily marketed and produced, and you got to wonder, well, what's their process? What's their system, and is it a numbers game for them, or are they actually caring? And I think a lot of them actually do care, right? Like, but again, it's so hard to gauge, and that's why I think the best thing you can do is try and have just a meet and greet conversation before you ever have any money. And I think if a mentor's unwilling to do that, then like even like a 5-10 minute conversation, meet and greet, 15, it doesn't have to be a full hour of their time or whatever, but because me as someone who takes on mentors is I want to actually have an understanding of who you are as an individual, and there are certain characteristics that I would like you to have. Ideally, you got to be autonomous, you got to be self-driven and working, because at the end of the day, I want to allow you to get the most out of this experience. And if you're going to kind of come back, I found the students that every week when I'm like, okay, well, if you want to achieve these goals, we're going to kind of need to follow along with this, and we're going to need to do this. And then week after week, they come back, I didn't quite have the time to do this. I didn't quite have the time to do this. So like, okay, that's fine. Everybody gets busy. But at the end of the day, that is just a sacrifice that won't allow you to quite meet your goals. And usually those relationships tend to, or not relationships, but those mentorship experience tend to fizzle off because, it sort of gets very cyclical, where I'm like, this is kind of what you need to do. This is where we need to be going. And this isn't something I can do for you, kind of thing. And so me as a mentor, I love to have these pre-conversations. I will always have like a free 30-minute conversation with someone just to make sure that A, they understand who I am and feel like I have something to offer them, but B, make sure that I actually feel like I have something of value to offer them. And we're going to actually connect and have a relationship that's going to benefit both of us, because that's what I want out of every relationship.
Yeah, it's got to be a good fit for both parties, hasn't it, ultimately? Mm-hmm. One of my questions leading on from that was going to be to do with maybe like amber or red flags when it comes to mentees. So you mentioned there about what sounded like organisation and time management. Probably sounds like it'd be a big one, and commitment, I guess, as well. Would you say those are like the biggest, for want of a better way of putting it, red flags for you from your perspective as a mentor?
I would definitely say the biggest thing for me is communication. If the communication is very wishy-washy and seemingly dishonest and distant, then that is that's a big yellow red flag to me. And I personally find time and sometimes not necessarily responding in a timely manner can definitely be a sign of that. But I think there are other aspects in terms of conversation that how polite and how cordial they are with you, how they sort of are, when they kind of get busy and go distant for a while, are they willing to go above and beyond to sort of make up and be like, hey, I understand we kind of I've been a little bit on the wear, let's have a good hour-long chat to catch up, or let's have something just to sort of and again that comes down to, as a consumer, if time is much more of a factor, then that's a conversation you always need to have up front. And that's something that I always like to discuss in those meetings and in that intro session as well, is what kind of deadlines and timelines are you looking for? Because then again, I can know, do I have the time to commit to be able to give you what you need to achieve those goals? And so, that's definitely the biggest thing for me is communication and being able to sort out issues before they happen as well as when they happen, and understanding that, there doesn't need to be a party at fault that's going to take blame, and just, having that rock solid communication. And so, ghosting someone and not really being respectful about it, definitely a red flag. But someone going, not responding for a couple of days, in my mind, as long as they make up for it and justify it, because at the end of the day, a lot of what we're working with is musicians and artists, and they have randomly fickle schedules, randomly fickle, inspiration times where they're like, oh, I just gotta turn phone off, go Zoom, go whatever, and get lost for weeks at a time. Who knows? Or they're touring, or whatever the case might happen, right? So, in my sense, I'm a lot more understanding that as long as there's an element of respect and forgiveness to the communication at all elements at all time, and there are, there is just a strong level of communication, I would see. And if you don't feel like the communication is comfortable for you, then that's probably a sign that, you and them may not have the best relationship, and that is definitely going to translate into the mentorship experience not being as rock solid as you might want it to be.
Yeah, and I think those are transferable as well when it comes to actually working with individuals when you're working on a mix or some sort of music production based project as well. And it's something that I would look out for if someone was to get in contact with me with regards to mixing or production or something like that, would be communication. If they do go ghost, which does happen, unfortunately, as part of the mixing, when you do have clients come in who want mixing or request information on your service. So I totally agree with that, and it's cross. I was going to say platform. Yeah, we'll roll with that. Cross platform as well. It sort of transcends other aspects of the music industry. Yeah. So what I'd like to move on to now, Dan, was what we were chatting about off air, is your songwriting process. So you mentioned that you've recently reevaluated or taken a step back and sort of looked at your processes and you've changed them. Can you tell our audience a bit about how you've made that change and what it consists of?
Yeah. So on paper, the change is as simple as adding an extra step, but obviously in your mind, it's like this whole groundbreaking realization where you're like, wow, how did I not see this before? And so, I come from a background of the reason why I ever fell in love with sound in the first place was, I don't know how many years back, discovered what a synthesizer was, and mind was blown. I was like, this is the sound that I remember growing up from all the songs. I just didn't understand what that sound was, like I'd heard a synth numerous times and countless songs, but I'd never fully understood what it was. And then I learned what it was. I was like, wow, this is something that I need to invest a little bit more time in. And so synthesizers have always been, like I say, the root of it, and my studio entirely around me is basically built to be more of a synth recording studio, mastering suite than a post-production studio in any way, shape, or form. And, I do my post at the studio for the most part. But so because of that, my process was very much trying to, integrate hardware and software in a very cordial manner. And so there was a definite section where I sort of distanced myself entirely from the laptop and just did, hardware jams sequence entirely, in the realm of the analog and hardware world. And then obviously create a lot of jams where it was just in the computer, and sort of the past 2 years, I guess, was bridging the build between the two of them. And so my process ended up becoming, where I landed on last year, which felt very comfortable, was starting off in the hardware domain, where it's a lot more hybrid setup now, where I'm using Ableton as sort of the most master sequencer, so it's very much a hybrid setup, but the sound sources initially are entirely hardware to be able to have that tactile. I like to dance around and jam while I'm experiencing it. Really makes it feel a lot more organic for me. And then what'll happen is once I kind of get the skeleton out and looped, I'll sort of play that loop skeleton into a song and record the bass idea. And what I used to essentially do was basically call it that, add some extra VSTs and some layers to sort of fill up the space, mix it, and sort of move on. But then I kind of realized once that I was like, okay, well, how much editing am I necessarily doing in this? Once I feel like I've sound designed things, how much editing am I doing? And then I started to think about it. I'm like, well, pretty much next to nothing unless I hear a major problem. And then I sort of started thinking about it a little bit more, and I was like, well, what do I do at at the studio for post-production most of the time? It's editing. It's sound effects editing, dialogue editing, just fine, precise chopping and maneuvering audio clips. And I was like, well, if this is the one skill that, apart from sound design, that I've probably actually put the 10,000 hours into, why am I not using this in my songwriting process, right? And as soon as I did that, I sort of really, especially as someone who's delved into the world of modular and all sorts of random sound design elements, there's so many unexpected magical moments that happen within the realm of synthesis. Modular aside, even just like your standard VSTs, you can get some absolutely crazy, unexpected, otherworldly things that just you have no predictability of. And what I realized was, and this is probably an obvious reality to some, and that it kind of is, but I kind of realized is that, well, if these moments are, so chaotic and so unpredictable, well, then editing is going to give me a really easy way to sort of make them a little bit more predictable and a little bit more maneuverable. And then so really all I really did was kept my songwriting process the same, but added that one extra step. And it was kind of this really enlightening moment where I was like, well, what other skills am I neglecting that I have in my back pocket that I've been using, for the past couple of years, that I've just been neglecting to even consider in my songwriting process. And I'm a very big believer of process is everything. I don't go into my DAW with the function of what song do I write, how do I want to do it. I go, what are the rules I want to set in place, and what sort of process do I want to follow to be able to make sure that decisions are somewhat made for me so that I can just groove and create. Because once the parameters and once the process is set in motion, I don't have to think. I can just enjoy and let the process unfold. And that's really, been the biggest game changer for me as far as songwriting goes, is started focusing way more on the process than the actual song. And then as soon as I get the process, it's kind of just like a little formula. You throw in some themes, you throw in some ideas about what is your inspiration for that song or for that idea. Then you just go through the steps, and it's, you never get to that point where you're stuck, because a lot of moments happen in songwriting where you kind of get to that step where you're like, okay, well, where do I take it from here? And when your process is rock solid, whenever you get to those moments of where do I take it from here, usually that means you're done the step that you were working on, and it's time to move on to the next step. And that's really what, to me, a rock solid process was. So making this big groundbreaking change where I added this final step of editing was, like I say, it wasn't shaking things up or completely rewriting my process, but it was, a good internal look of what skills have I been neglecting, and how can I, add an extra element of not only fine-tune polish, but completely reshape sounds that I thought I had gotten where I want, to be able to, make the bridge section still cohesive to the main drop that I had, but still way different due to the editing. Because especially, on the realm of modular, you can't save your patches. Even with some of the digital modules, if you turn the thing on and off, the things reset, and, you got to know exactly where the things were, and it's never gonna be quite exactly the same. And so oftentimes that moment is lost forever. And I among many others view that as one of the beautiful things about synthesis, right? That's being able to have that sound there and then gone forever is such a beautiful reality, but it also creates a lot of problems when it comes to the songwriting process, and when you feel like you had a great loop but you don't really know where to take it, and you don't really know where to go from there. And yeah, adding that extra step to my process really wasn't a crazy groundbreaking step, but it made it just that much easier to be like, okay, well, now I feel like I'm stuck, but the song's not quite done. Well, let's just go do some fine-tune edits and polishing things to move things around to create little, flutters and whirls and percussive elements of sounds that I already had created that are already in the mix. So I know they're going to gel. I know they're going to work. They're already designed to sort of work there, and they're already in the song. And so, it's just really given me another opportunity that whenever I feel stuck, okay, well, move on to the next step. Ooh, I'm stuck, but the song still doesn't quite feel polished. Well, then now I have that extra step to be like, all right, well, here's one final little tool in the toolbox to really go through with a fine-tooth comb and get it that much closer to where I want it to be.
Yeah, I really like what you said there about processes. and having that process, that songwriting process, and it's almost like, for one of a better way of putting it, like a formula, and
Yeah.
using that to remain. Because I know what it's like. What you mentioned there right at the beginning about how you could look at a DAW. I remember doing it years ago and just sitting there and thinking, right, let's write a song without any process or any thought going into it. I'm thinking, right, okay, and hoping that at some point inspiration is going to strike and I'm going to suddenly come out with something, but actually having a process. So with that process then, is it almost like a checklist that you follow when it comes to the songwriting? Or can you sort of like flick between stages?
So that's the biggest challenge about process for me, is it all comes down to your process needs to be rigid enough that you always know when you're done a step and when you need to move on to a next step, but flexible enough that you can still fiddle things around and sort of skip steps, go back steps, and sort of do what you necessarily want to do, and sometimes avoid steps altogether if you don't feel like they suit the occasion. And so that, makes it a very hard concept, right? Because then your process is never quite the exact same, and that's why I like to have more of a general process in the way my workflow is set up, in the way the studio is set up, in the way things are. So process, to me, is more than just a checklist of I do this, this, and this. It's the entire workflow of how you engage with your environment, how your things are cabled and set up, how you understand what tools do what, and having a very strong and good understanding of what machines and what ideas are going to make a good relationship with each other. Because there's, especially if you're dealing with a hybrid analog setup like I'm dealing with, and like a lot of synth producers I know are, because let's face it, we all love synths. That definitely gives you a lot of tactile opportunity and a lot of ways to change up your process, but then it also adds some hiccups and some ways that you can do things. And there's always multiple ways to do the same thing. So, it's more, it comes back to me, process is really the way you look at your environment and how you sort of engage, and how having the understanding that, there's kind of a guideline, but I never really view it as a checklist, and I never kind of check things off. I just always have it as sort of, a general guideline of here are some things and here are some realities that I always want to keep top of mind while I'm doing things, but nothing is ever this needs to be done and then this needs to be done and I need to check this box off, because that rigidity can, I find, also suck the inspiration and the flow out of you when you're like, oh, I'm doing this, but my process says I should do this. Oh, where do I need to go? And that's the biggest challenge with finding a good process for you. And I've been developing mine for the past, I don't know, since I started producing. It's been the biggest thing I sort of realized at the beginning was, wow, there's so much stuff to figure out, and I don't really need to use all the tools, so I got to figure out what tools I like and how I like to use them and how they relate with other tools that I like to use. And so process is never done. Your process is never like, oh yeah, I got a process. Now I can create the song of my dreams. It's the second you feel like your process is done, then you're going to stay stagnant and you're not really going to be able to grow anymore, right? So even this past month, right? This adding new techniques and new tips to my process are happening all the time, and changing things and readapting things and understanding that, oh, I got this new tool. This kind of overrides the old way I used to do things, and sort of, again, understanding how you sort of interact with the tools around you and the comfortability of knowing what they do and how you can get them to do it.
Yeah, very interesting. I like what you said there about not being too rigid as well, which is why I kind of asked the question there about the checklist, and because otherwise, it would be too rigid, and I think you mentioned there it would ultimately suck the life out of it. So just to cap things off with regards to the processes, what would you say is probably the most important step, for want of a better way of putting it, in your process that you have?
In my process?
Yeah.
I would personally say, now that's a tough one. Yeah, that's a real tough one. I honestly don't know if I can answer that, because I think the beauty of the process is it's how the parts all interact with each other to create the final product. Because as we all know, inside the Mix podcast, a lot of the listeners, I'm sure, are mixers. As you all know, it's all about perspective, right? And how we hear things in a mix is very dependent on our ears and how we like to hear things. And sure, there's definitely the Fletcher Munson curve and realities of what we're actually, psychoacoustics and how the ears hear things. But there's a lot of different ways you can kind of mix things and go through things. And I completely lost my train of thought.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah. What was I saying? Let's see. Bunch of mixes. I had a good point going there, but anyways, it's lost me. Yeah, what was the question again? Oh man.
That's okay. The question was the most important step in your process.
Yes.
I think you were saying that you couldn't answer it, but you were sort of developing that.
No, I think yeah. It's all about how the process sort of interacts with each other, and I feel like there is I forgot where I was going with the whole. I had some way to tie it back to mix, but I completely lost it. So we're just gonna leave it at that. Yeah, I don't. I think each part is equally as valuable as the last. I would definitely say my favorite part is the initial part where I get to dance around and play with the hardware and patches and whatever else. That's definitely my favorite part. But it's hard to say that creating the skeleton is the most important part of the jam and part of the song, because taking that 95 to 100% usually takes the most amount of work, I find, and a lot of producers will kind of agree, because it's just so hard to know when a song is done and when to go from there. So it's and that's why the process is so important, because it allows you to follow the steps in a semi-fluent but not too rigid way to be able to get that 95 to 100% without overthinking it a little bit too hard. So yeah, I don't think I definitely have one most important, but my favorite's definitely the first one, where I get to make noise on the synths.
Yeah. I'm not surprised, to be honest. If you've got the possibility and the option there to use those synthesizers. And it's interesting what you mentioned there about knowing when the song is finished, because I often ask that question when I speak to mix engineers and artists as well, and knowing when a song is finished and being able to put it to bed. Because I regularly talk to other producers, and they'll send a song across for me to have a listen to, or just anyone really, and just say, hey, you give me a bit of feedback on this. And sometimes it's a case of having to say, look, at some point you have to stop and put this song to bed and then move on to the next one, knowing when, for want of a better way of putting it, when good is good enough probably isn't the right way to put it, but knowing when to sort of move on. How do you find that yourself?
The old saying, good enough is better than perfect. And I've teetered back and forth on that idea for a while. I definitely used to be the individual that would just sort of release things and move on. And I think from a learning perspective, that is going to achieve the best results. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in my mind, in my perspective, that from a learning point of view, spending hours and hours trying to get that last 5% is going to be a nightmare, because you may have made some previous mistakes that are going to get it really hard to fix that reality. And so understanding that, hey, I made some of these mistakes, these are some of the outcomes that happened, rather than trying to rewrite the wheel and go back and refix those things, understanding that, okay, well, I got this good enough. I understand that this is an issue, but here's why it's an issue, and here's some things I can do to correct that in the next mix, and then don't do that in the next mix, and then it doesn't become a problem that you need to spend all this time correcting, and you can learn through your problems that way. So from a perspective of trying to learn, trying to get better, growing as fast as you can, just finish a song and move on. But now, obviously, from a creative, integral perspective, that opens up a whole nother debate of how much do you love that song, how attached to you, what's the meaning and sentimental value of the concept and the themes behind the song, and all that other reality. So in those situations, if you're extremely like this is your most passion project, then there's a little bit more understanding and concept in my mind to be able to, like, yeah, well, let's take the time, let's go back and fix those problems and do what needs to be done, because this is so important to you. And that's really the biggest distinction with me, I feel like. If you want to, if it's, this is your song, this is your project, this is it, then spending those extra hours, months, whatever it takes, is without a doubt the way to do it. But if you're like, I want to get better, and I just want to make songs, and I have a lot of ideas in my head, and I got to get them out, then you got to get them out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I fall on the side of just get the songs out. If you've got ideas in your head, get them out. And I'm guilty of not doing that myself. I preach and I try and practice as best I can, but I'm very much like what you said there about the get that final 5%, is it actually going to make any difference? And sometimes I do find myself going down that rabbit hole, and I think that's probably where I need to refine my processes myself, you know.
And oftentimes what I've realized, and funny case is this happened yesterday actually. So I'm basically was submitting a song to the PVC collab, like the Petite Victory collab album this February, and it was like an old January song. So the January mix and whatever was done was so casually, so free fluent, just created, did in January, in the spirit of just creating one jam a day, moving on. And so then, when Graham kind of approached me and was like, "Hey, do you want to, I want you to kind of submit a song for this," I was like, "All right, yeah, let's do it." So I, went through my roster of the 31 jams and found the one that I sort of felt to be my, the one that I wanted to submit. And I sort of opened the project. I'm like, well, damn, this is like a 3-minute song that's like already mixed and pretty much ready to go. So I did a quick 30-minute polish, again in the same headspace of just dub-a-dub-a-dub, happily jam and do whatever. Just quick 30 minutes, add some extra little layers, add some ideas here. All right, bounce it out, bump, 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 done. And that master, man, it sounds good.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, here's like one tiny little mistake I want to go fix. Went straight neuroticism into that mix, and like, I think I got it a little bit better sounding in terms of a club mix, and it would bounce a little bit better in some systems, but at the same time, it didn't quite feel as warm and quite nice and as lush, and the bottom end wasn't quite as rounded out, and I was like, well, I didn't need to go that last 3%. That just made it worse. I had hit the point of diminishing returns kind of thing, and sure enough, I was rushing a little bit because I was trying to go out, and I only had like X amount of time to do it, so that was definitely a factor into it as well. But I ended up submitting the original master. I was like, I given the state of what this album is going to be, and it's just going to be a Bandcamp album that's, really going to be played for casual listening, I want the warmer, softer mix.
Yeah.
It was no question for me. And so that's what I ended up submitting. I'm like, I wasted, an hour and a half and a lot of stress going back and forth deciding which master was better, ultimately to figure out that, the one that I had done casually initially and got it good enough was the one I liked more.
Yeah, I've often done that. I use Logic myself, and I'm sure you have the same in sort of Ableton and other DAWs where you have alternatives. And every time I do something that's going to be quite a big change or whatever, I have alternatives. And I regularly flick back to previous alternatives after a session. And then I think for me, sometimes I think that's the catalyst to say, you know what, this is done. If I'm spending another hour or two trying to binge edit or tweak something, and then find out it doesn't work, and then just revert back to what you had before, 100%. So what I'd like to move on to now, Dan, is the sort of sound design. So you mentioned that you do a lot of sound design. You work in post production as well, and you've worked on Stranger Things, Ms. Marvel, and whatnot. If our audience wanted to, because I know off air, and I said this, I've had discussions with the audience about sound design and how some of them want to move into sound design or develop their skill set. What would you suggest is the best place to start if you really, really wanted to get into sort of sound design, sampling, and synthesis? What would your top tip be?
Just start doing it, because there's a million and one ways to do it. I personally came from, well, I shouldn't say there's a million and one ways to do it, but there's a lot of different angles to come at it. And, I know, understanding, I guess, what kind of sounds or appeal to you the most, and what kind of sounds do you want to make, right? Because I know a lot of people that absolutely have the most passion and joy in their life to basically go out and, get a lot of field recordings and do a lot of interesting, sound design in a more organic sort of natural element, and, that achieves a certain type of sound. Or do you want to do more cinematic sort of, sound design that's going to be a little bit more horror based, or, understanding that there's a bunch of different tools in sound design, and kind of getting to learn first what are the sounds that kind of intrigue you and where do you want to go, and then kind of just start reverse engineering things from there, and as well as just taking videos and try and sound design them yourself. Just throw together whatever you can on a video you love, and just sort of see what you can come about of it. And that sort of experience is so much more valuable than just sort of tweaking around and making sounds for the sake of making sounds, but actually having a purpose to the sounds you're making and trying to get that to sound as realistic to either the picture or the concept or the idea that is in front of you. Because sound design for the sake of sound design, I love that. It's such a meditative and respectful and wonderful thing to be able to just go, sit in front of a synth and just start making some sounds and exploring and letting it sort of guide where you want to go and almost having a conversation with it. But for the sake of sound design and wanting to do that as a career, having the focus, or even wanting to just do that on a level of getting some projects that are kind of fun to work on, it's having a purpose and having a portfolio is the best place to start. And you can make your own portfolio. They don't have to be paid gig. They don't even need to be projects. They can just be stuff that you've done. Like like I say, take a video, throw some sound effects behind it that you created and you organized and whatever, and then boom, you've got a little piece of a portfolio. There doesn't need to be much more than that, because your portfolio is about the sound design, right? It's about how it sounds and how it fits the mood in the picture and how realistic it feels. And so that's probably my biggest advice is try to get a concept and sort of a direction with that, and then once you have that direction, build your portfolio a little bit more to be able to have things to show people and have things to reach out. And then it becomes a whole different conversation about, networking and branding and showcasing yourself. But the best place to start is get yourself a direction and a goal, and then build a portfolio that suits that direction and that goal. And that's the best stepping stone, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, the idea of reverse engineering is fantastic, and it's something that I do when it comes to songwriting. If I hear a song that I particularly like, for example, I'll try and reverse engineer it if it's a particular part of that song. So I think reverse engineering, and I think the key thing what you said there is having a purpose to what you're doing and a reason why you're doing it. Otherwise, once again, you could sit, because I know a lot of the audience use soft synth, so they'll sit with a DAW and you have the synthesizer in front of you. But if you don't really have a purpose as to what you're trying to create, you can quite easily become disinterested, I think, or disillusioned with the process.
Or just come up with absolutely anything, and then when it comes down to, okay, you've created all these cool sounds, now you get a great gig, and they're like, hey, we have all these specific requests. We want you to do this. Hey, this doesn't quite sound the way we thought it would sound. Can you do something a little bit more like this? Then those revisions become a whole lot harder, because you're like, oh, I just sort of created what was in my mind, not necessarily what sort of was in front of me or what was given to me, right? Because especially in the realm of sound design, is sure, you have a lot of creativity to it, but very rarely are you the one that has the final say on what gets selected. And there's a lot of times where I've spent an hour on a nice patch with my modular, I got it sounding exactly where we want, and then what ends up getting selected is just a sample from the library. And it's like, damn, but that's just the reality. You don't always have the final say. And so understanding that, there doesn't need to be the same sound as what you're hearing. You can get really creative with it, and oftentimes sounds that you would not at all think are the sound end up being a way better job for the sound than the actual sound itself, due to how it punches through in the mix and all sorts of other factors in the final post process. And so there's a lot of other factors at bay than just sound design, right? It's how does that sound fit into the overall context of the mix? And some of these mixes you're dealing with 600-700 channels easily, and it's just one little measly channel in there, right? So it needs to cut through in a way that the listener can hear, but not override the other factors, whatever. So there's a lot of other aspects than just the sound that you choose, and trying to make it sound as realistic to what that sound is, because sometimes what is the actual real sound is not at all the best sound for the job.
Yeah. Excellent advice. I would agree with that. When I've come to, I don't do it so much anymore, when I've done sound design in the past, I often think, I want this particular sound, and whatever I create in the end is probably quite far removed from what it is that I wanted, but it suits better and it fits better, Yeah. My next question off the back of that was, with regards to sound design, do you do it in the songwriting process, or do you do them totally separately? So you might, today I'm going to be writing a song, and then I'm going to sound design separately, or do they sort of cross over?
Pretty split. I definitely have sound design sessions, without a doubt. and they definitely often will become the base of a songwriting or of a song or of a concept or something like that. But there are definitely a lot of times where, I've gotten the song pretty well arranged, pretty well structured, and I'm like, I want to hear this sound. And, usually I'll go sculpt something that is going to be where I want it to be and fill the frequency space and do what I want it to do. So there's a lot of times where, once the skeleton's there, then I'll be like, ooh, it really needs, a little plucky bell, or it really needs just a lush pad or something like that. And in a lot of cases, I'll be like, ooh, I know exactly a patch that I have that's going to work great for that. But there's definitely some instances where I'm like, let me just, I think I can make something that's a bit better than what I got. And there's definitely other instances where I'm like, I feel like something's missing, but I don't really know what. Then I'll often just sort of set a simple sequence through to a synth and just start exploring and having a conversation with the music and letting the synth sort of guide the way, and use sound design almost as an arrangement concept. And so, it's definitely a pretty evenly split part of my process that sort of finds its way in a lot of different pockets and a lot of different elements throughout the whole actual songwriting process, I would say.
Yeah, I thought that's what you were going to say, something along those lines, because it's a conversation I've had with a previous guest, and I can't remember for the life of me who the guest was, because I've had so many. But it was a case of the separate sessions. But like you said there are going to be instances where one goes into the other just naturally, because, like you say, you want a particular sound at that given moment, so you're gonna have them cross over.
And especially, coming from the starting of my process is very hardware focused. So in doing that, what usually ends up happening is, maybe I'll start on these patches that I've sort of created, but then as I'm dancing around, maybe I'll tweak a knob a little bit more than I intended to, and some happy accidents will appear, or some, happy and intentional things will happen where the sound will sort of just delve into a different realm, and I'll be like, oh, well, that worked pretty well. And so then, the sound design kind of, like I say, becomes a little element of arrangement, and that's, brings me to what I love to do in the actual sound design sessions is when I create a patch and the patch is sounding good, that's only 50% of the work for me. What is the more important part of sound design and a patch for me is how manipulatable is that patch, right? So macro knobs in this case are your best friend, because you can create your own special little instances and parameters to be like, when I turn this knob, this specific instance happens. When I turn this knob, this specific instant happens. Here's going to be a good sort of energy building effect. Here's going to be an energy downlift. Also you can sort of create that life and movement within your patch to be able to use it as more than just a stagnant instrument. And sure, we can go automate our filter sweeps and do that manually, but I find doing that in the sound design process makes it way more of an organic experience, because then again, what it comes down to is when I'm doing my jamming around, tweaking knobs experience, I have those macro knobs to play with and use as an instrument and as a mixer to be able to sort of phase them in and out and completely sculpt the sound from one idea to another, even though it's the same patch. And that can do wonders for the continuity of a song, because it's all one patch that flows between another, but it's two completely different sounds at the end of the day, right? And and so to me, that's why I say designing the sound and getting it to sound good, that's only 50% of the battle. Getting it to sound manipulable and organic to sort of flow between different areas, that's what really creates a good patch for me.
Yeah, it's quite nice. The way you describe it there is having those sort of tactile and being able to change those, whether I suppose with the hardware and you've got the macros that you can change, or doing it in the box, you're going to use the ones in the box. But actually, it's never really been spoken of that way on the podcast. In that, don't just stick with the patch that you have, but actually throughout the piece, change the parameters of that patch to come up with something new and something different. And I think that will only help with songwriting in terms of listener interest as well, if you've got that patch and you're changing it throughout the composition.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I definitely got through the modular community, because there's, I think it was Sarah Bell Reed that said it. And I've never been a student of hers, but I definitely know a couple people that have taken her modular lessons and, speak very quite fondly of it. And anyways, she's very quite renowned in her performances and her experiences. And so basically, the quote that really stood out for me as far as her modular performance is like, I intentionally destroy my patches. Get them completely mangled and lost, and then try and resculpt them back to what I remember. And I was like, wow, that's such a powerful, bold,
Mm-hmm.
but completely powerful, and I sort of took that and ran with that a little bit in more of a controlled setting, and was like, okay, well, let me just put a little bit more foresight into how can I destroy these patches in a constructive and concise way without actually destroying them, but just rather mangling them in a concise way. And so I think that's something that a lot of modular people do, because let's face it, you're just going to lose a patch regardless, so you might as well go down with the ship kind of thing, and embrace it. But it was, I was sort of taking it to like, well, how can I bring this back to sort of an organized element of chaos? Because I love chaos, but it's got to have a little bit of, it can't just be pure chaos. so that was really the biggest takeaway, and yeah, I think it all stemmed from that quote from her, and then I just sort of took that and ran with it, and took it outside the modular realm, took it to all my hardware, all the VSTs, every patch I create, even in terms of adding effects to those patches. You can create macros in Ableton to be able to link your reverb and your delays and other things to be able to create macros within the effects as well. And so just making things manipulable and changeable is only going to make for a more tactile and organic experience when it comes down to songwriting, I find.
I love that idea. That quote is brilliant. Taking a patch and then pretty much destroying it and then trying to get back to where you were. I'm going to give that a go myself. I never thought of doing that. And that sounds like such a fun way of just experimenting and creating. Just taking something, destroying it, and then
you record it all, and then goes back to our conversation of editing. Earlier in this earlier in the chat, it's like you just record it all. Some of it may be an absolute mess of noise that you might not want to use.
Yeah.
But some of it may be really, really cool. It just needs a little bit of, time manipulation and whatever to get it to exactly fit with the idea of your song. And, through editing you can kind of do that. And so it's sort of a fun little, you can just do that, in a song, or you can kind of also just do that with just a random patch for the sake of learning your patches and trying to create those macros. But, if you record it all, if you come across a really cool idea, then you can save that, you can snip that, and you can edit that. And that's a sound that you might not really ever be able to get back again because it was just done through random patching.
No, fantastic. I love that. This has been great. I've realised we're almost at the hour mark, and that has absolutely flown by. Yeah, I know. So with that in mind, Dan, this has been brilliant, and I know the audience are going to get loads out of this with regards to sound design. And audience listening, if you do go on to do more sound design, please do report back what you've taken from this, because we'd be very intrigued to know. Can you just, so we'll sort of finish it up, wrap it up here. Can you just let our audience know where they can find you online if they want to get in contact?
So I've got a website, danfurproductions.com. If anybody wants to head up there, there's sort of a link for a free 30-minute chat for anybody who's interested in learning a little about mentorship, a little bit about mixing, or just want to sort of have a little chat about something. Send me a message. I'm also quite active on Instagram. I would say is my most prominent social media, and that's Danfur Music. And yeah, I also have TikTok as well at Danfur Productions, but I haven't quite been on there in a good long while. So if you wanted to go on a follow, there's some archives of some tips on there, but it's been about a year since I've posted much on there. So I would say Instagram is probably the best place to contact me. But if you want to learn a little bit more about about Danfur Productions, then you can go to danfurproductions.com, and that'll like I say, allow you to book a quick chat with me. Check out a little bit more about some of the things I offer, and yeah. But I would say I'm a casual guy. There's if you want to just pop onto my Instagram, say hi, ask any questions about things you heard today. By all means, I'd be more than happy to clarify anything. If there's something that you were quite interested in, we didn't quite go down the detail that you were looking for, just send me a chat. We'll answer it for you.
Yeah, fantastic. And I highly recommend doing that as well, because in the space of an hour, there's only so much you can get through. So if you do have any questions and want to dive deeper into sound design, I highly encourage you to do that. And I will put links to all those in the episode notes as well, so the audience can go away and hit those up. But Dan, a big thanks for today. Thank you very much for spending your Sunday with me. I don't know what time it is where you are. What is it, middle of the day?
Yeah, just about noon. Yeah, no, it was my
Yeah.
pleasure. I got up, walked the dog, already had some coffee, so it's been a pleasant morning.
Lovely
I've
stuff.
been happy to do this. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. No, no, absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure. And do go, if you're on Instagram, do go follow down on Instagram because the videos that he posts are great and you get to see more of the modular synth and whatnot that he's tinkering with as well. So do go and do that. But yeah, I will leave you now to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And once again, a huge thank you and I'll catch up with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, and thanks again for having me.
My pleasure.